When I was working there in the summer holidays, people would come in, delivery drivers, all kinds of stuff from the motor trade. And my dad would always say, I'll tell you what, can I get a discount on that if my lad can beat you at arm wrestling? They'd look at me, 12, 13-year-old kid, and be like, you got a deal? No problem. And I would beat the guy. And I get a call from Eddie Hall.
Yep.
He says, look, got 7 weeks. I've signed up. I'm going to be arm wrestling Brian. You being me, I'm looking for short footage. And I'm looking to see anything I can of you arm wrestling. What can I analyse? And I start looking at this, and I think, okay, Brian's way bigger, stronger, but he's not moving well. I had a perception and an expectation. For everybody who's a fan of Brian Shaw, I can tell you, I was wrong. The only reason that Brian has not been moving or looked better at the table is because he hadn't had access to the right lanes. Watch what's coming.
Welcome to the Shaw Strength Podcast. I am your host, Brian Shaw, and today we are joined by none other than Mr. Neil Pickup. I don't even know how to introduce you, man. Like, you've done so much stuff. The voice of strongman in a lot of regards, voice of arm wrestling in a lot of regards, voice of motocross.
I would say go with one of the more basic ones, something adopted by many people that know me well, including my wife.
Yeah.
Fat lad.
Fat lad. This is not. Yeah. No. We're not going to go down that lane immediately. So many things, man. So Neil is over here. If you're not familiar with Neil at all, which some of you may not be, but it's going to be a fun conversation today on the podcast. Neil is over here training me for arm wrestling. Mm-hmm. So that's, the primary objective. And he's got 40 years of knowledge in the sport of arm wrestling. And there's a lot of backstory to that, but that's the quick introduction. But I want to dive into you a little bit, kind of your story, where you got started, because you got started, with everything at a young age too. So. Super young.
Yeah. I got into, my background was combat sport. So I started out, sort of all my family were involved with the sport of boxing. And I'd always liked combat sport. I'd always liked strength sport from being a puppy. So I was, like yourself, huge fan of World's Strongest Man. Christmas time in the UK, it's like a tradition. So I would always sort of be sat on my dad's knee at 4 years old, getting ready to watch World's Strongest Man. It was a big thing. And the other thing that the family loved was the boxing. And we'd get up middle of the night, watch the Mike Tyson fight.
That's awesome.
4 a.m. We'd be back in bed by 5 past, usually when it was a Tyson fight. So it had always been part of my thing. And I got into boxing. Started down that route, and other combat sports as well, various martial arts, wrestling, and so on and so on. My mum didn't like that. My Uncle Sam had died of a brain aneurysm, which may or may not have been linked to boxing. But as far as my mum was concerned, it definitely was.
So she was convinced of that.
She did not want me boxing. I loved it. My dad was okay with it, but it was upsetting my mum. She obviously thought I was going down the wrong route in that respect. Everything I did within combat sport, and from a very young age, I had an awareness that I was stronger than the average lad. When I was at school, you always have the sort of gym tests, whether it be a basic bench press, a curl, whatever it is. I was always excessively strong versus the other lads that I would do that against. And one of the big tests of strength was arm wrestling. My dad's my hero. He's my guy. Always has been, always will be. Just a motor mechanic, but to me, he's the greatest man I've ever met.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he had a mechanic business. He had a garage. All the lads would sit across the brew bench, and it was the test of manhood. They would arm wrestle. And when I was
in the shop there,
there. So when they had various things like that. They had an anvil, a big anvil that we, like rite of passage. You had to lift this anvil up onto the bench, which was like 4 foot high, the welding bench. So there was various things like this. And when I was a kid, it was like, I don't know, I liked being around my dad and the guys, and it was just like, it was the coolest thing in the world. But they would arm wrestle across this brew bench, and it was like the test of strength, and all the lads would just gather around in this sort of grimy environment and see who was the strongest. And it just seemed visceral to me, and it was great. And I wanted to do it. And my dad would go to the gym. He'd weight train with the lads. They'd meet up and go to the gym a couple of times, just throw things around on the bench and so on. And he wouldn't let me do it because I was a puppy. I was too young. But what he would do is at the end of the session, he said, come on, let's have an arm wrestle. When I'm sort of 5, 6 years old.
So real young.
Mm-hmm. And I would always try to beat my dad. Never could. And in my mind, somewhere it sort of burned in one day, One day I want to be able to beat my dad. I want to be like my dad, as strong as my dad. And we did this for ages. And by the time I'm sort of 12 years old, I'm really pretty strong. And my dad's really noticing this. By the time I'm 13 years old, I can beat my dad.
That's crazy.
Yeah, really unusual.
Well, especially because I guarantee he was not weak.
No, very strong lad.
Yeah.
No idea of arm wrestling, didn't understand that, but neither did I.
Yeah.
It was literally just, that was it, sideways. That was very unusual. So my dad started to, when the lads were from the garage, had come in, and we'd have, other guys had come in. So when I was working there in the summer holidays, people would come in, delivery drivers, all kinds of stuff from the motor trade. And my dad would always say, I'll tell you what, can I get a discount on that if my lad can beat you at arm wrestling?
That's crazy.
And they'd look at me, 12, 13-year-old kid, and be like, you got a deal, no problem. So my dad would put up some money. If I could beat the dude at arm wrestling, and I would beat the guy. Didn't win them all, but I won a good few,
Yeah. So he's betting on you and just saying, I'm competent.
It taught me a lot on his thing. I lost a few, won a few, but I loved it. I really enjoyed that. And against my sort of peers, against my lads my age, I was dominant. So around this time, Over the Top was getting filmed with Sylvester Stallone, and they did a qualifier in Manchester. And a friend of mine, a guy called Peter Tattersall, saw this cutout in the local newspaper. And he mentioned it, forgot about it. Then he saw another one in the Daily Star newspaper. And he's like, hey, this is a big thing. You want to look into this? And because I was the champion of the young boy,
of course, everybody's talking about Neil. Yeah.
So I take this to my dad and I say, hey, this is coming to Manchester. Can we go? It's an arm wrestling competition, and the winners get to go to this event in Las Vegas. They get to go to Over the Top. But I was like, yeah, let's go. You see why my dad's my hero. Some guys say they had it rough. I never did. My dad would back me on anything. It was amazing. Anything I wanted to do, he'd try to support me on and back me on. And he took me there. He took me to the Over the Top qualifier. I was just a pup, so they wouldn't let me wrestle, of course. Yeah. And they said, no, he's too young. And okay, we'll just watch. But I'm like, Dad, come on, can I do it? Just kept complaining. So he went back out and he said, look, if I sign a disclaimer for him, can he compete? And they said, oh, well, let me check. Go to the manager, check it out. They come back. They say, yeah, why not? Let him do it. So I go in, and I win my first match.
That's
and
awesome.
I win my second match. And when I win that second match, they started to make a thing of it. It was like, how old are you? And I said, like, we were at 12, 13 years. They're like, wow, that's incredible. And it became a thing. They made a big song and dance about me. And I'd never had anything like that in my life. And when you're a kid like that, it was like, wow, am I up something here? I'm people are talking about me. People are interested in what I can do. So it really bit deep.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know more about arm wrestling. I wanted to do it more. I wanted to be involved more. And that was the nucleus. That was the embryo, and started to go further from there.
That age is super impactful, right? Like, especially to gravitate towards something and have success in it where people are celebrating what you're doing. I mean, at that age, it's huge.
That notoriety and identity, I suppose.
Absolutely.
My dad sort of bit onto it because it was an opportunity to move me away from the fight sports.
Yeah.
To get me out of that. And it didn't work right away. I stayed in there till sort of 15, 16 years old. But every time I went to train for fighting, my mum wasn't happy. When I had a fight, she wouldn't come. She was like, I'm not coming watching you box. Made like this day, I'm not watching you fight. Okay. And one day I went round, she was crying.
Yeah.
And that really hit me. I was like, okay, this is not good. I had a chat with my dad and he said, like, maybe you could just do arm wrestling because you love arm wrestling. That gives you the same feeling, and it kind of does. It's got a lot of crossover, a lot of carryover from both combat and strength sport. And truth be known, I was much more talented at that. The strength had always been the underpinning. And it gave me that lane. It sort of opened up. It was sort of a perfect storm of opportunity, if you will, Brian.
Yeah.
And my dad really threw his weight in behind that. So if there was an arm wrestling competition anywhere, he'd finish work on a Friday night, jump in the shower, grab some food, and we'd drive 5 hours down to London, compete in an arm wrestling competition. I get my ass kicked, he'd drive me home. But he always was encouraging me all the time. Keep after it, you know. So it really started to become a central focus for me, you know. And when you look at your career and you look at back, I've been lucky enough to win some things in my life. I was multiple British, European and world champion. But all of those things really aren't of so much significance as much as the journey somehow. The prep, the getting yourself ready, focusing on something and really dialing into it. And a lot of why I'm here now is more around that prep, more around that focus and the manner in which I took to get to a level of success in the sport.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a neat thing, man. And like, you know, digging a little bit deeper, like at that type of age, to have the support from your parents and your dad doing that for you, like that's huge.
Yeah,
right?
It was amazing. I really am blessed in that respect. My dad had always sort of, because we'd come from a family where strength was respected. I mean, there's a strength tradition in England. I mean, if you look at the number of world's strongest men that have come out of Great Britain, it's disproportionately large for the size of the country. And I think that's because of that cultural acceptance and the sort of, I mean, even, you know, you look at Scotland and the Highland Games and all that kind of tradition and the stone lifting and there was a guy. So my dad and the lads used to go drinking in a pub called the Golden Cup. It was literally 5 minutes from where he worked. And it's a real working man's environment, you know. And he would come home on a Friday, come collect me, and I wanted to go. I wanted to be involved with it. So he'd chuck me in the car, we'd go down there, he'd buy himself a pint, get me a lemonade, and I'd sit at the side of the guys. And there across was a kind of like a shrine, a little shrine, to a guy called Bill Hunt, who was very, very well known in my town. And over the top of the shrine, it just said, King of Arm Strength, Bill Hunt. There's a picture of Bill just flexing his forearms and biceps. And again, I thought that really resonated with me. And I thought, this is awesome, you know. And I was lucky enough to meet Bill before he passed away. And he was truly remarkable, genuinely remarkable. And it's these kind of figures, these kind of characters that impact you enormously. And you don't realize so much at the time, you know. But they leave something, there's a part of them goes with you, you know. There's a bit of Bill Hunt there. There's talking to him, those conversations in the Golden Cup when he was a dusty old man and everybody forgot and nobody cared anymore, but I cared. That legacy, what he'd achieved, what he could do, was huge to me. Huge. And
with Bill Hunt, I mean, I know you brought him up a little bit while you're here, you know, just some of the kind of things that he was able to accomplish and do, you know, and to reach that legendary status, right? To be like that, celebrated like that. I mean, it's such a fascinating thing, you know, the difference, because, you know, a lot of the guys, especially from the UK, have said like, oh, World's Strongest Man is a Christmas tradition, right? Like you have it on. In America, there was not that. You would see it randomly on maybe like a really late night replay or something like that. Like it was never a set schedule for the most part with World's Strongest Man, certainly not around a holiday, right? So the I think the culture is just different in that aspect where, you know, the sports in America that are celebrated more are the major, you know, the kind of like the major four would be basketball, football, baseball, hockey, you know, like those. And that's kind of what most kids, I think, grow up seeing. They see more of that, but then, you know, somewhere in that path, you know, for me, it was like a magazine or, you know, just different things. But some kids are just fascinated by strength.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, especially if it's part of the culture, now it sets in a little bit different, right? Because that's something that can be celebrated and people can be excited about, is being strong. So like you hear about these legends like a Bill Hunt, or, you know, some of the guys, like when we were doing the History Channel show, where you're going after these legends. Now, what they did, was it a, you know, kind of made up story or tale?
Yeah.
Or did it actually happen? Right. And, you know, everybody's got their story about it and how it maybe happened, but it's neat before things were documented super well. Like how many of these like famous strongmen or strength figures, circus performers, circus strongmen, right? Like what they were able to do. So guys like that, like there's a special place, man. And for you to be able to meet somebody like that and for him to impact you is pretty cool.
Well, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I mean, you don't realize, I wish Bill was still alive and knew that I'd be sat here with a 4 times world's strongest man, with a genuine icon of global strength. And the other day in your gym here, we were talking about, I'm trying to basically emulate some of the things that he did.
Yeah.
I mean, how, you know,
that's cool.
It's wonderful,
really, really
isn't
cool.
it? You know, and it's that kind of thing that I think is, it sort of transcends any individual strength discipline. I think it goes across, there is that common vein that runs through everyone who's touched by strength, who's, you know, they say, involved in any kind of strength sport. And the carryover is huge. And that's, again, the reason we're here today. Although I'm involved in the strongman world, the arm wrestling crossover is incredibly exciting, because there's strength and there's something different. And within the fields of powerlifting and strongman, you find truly exceptional strength in various areas. And for me, the excitement of seeing some of the genuine titans of strength come into our sport is incredible. It's truly incredible. The likes of yourself, Eddie Hall, and some of the other guys and girls that are showing interest in that at the moment is just amazing. It's an opportunity to see what can be done. Where can we take this thing? You know? Yeah,
and I'm very excited about it for sure, man. Like, I mean, it's neat, and I think that, you know, for me with arm wrestling, there's been an interest in it, and kind of like yourself, it's like younger age. I arm wrestled, you know, in school, right? You'd go to the lunch table, let's see how it is, whatever. You don't know what you're doing at all, but you just kind of do it. But it's this, you know, measuring stick, right? Like, and then you obviously have the lifting that comes with that, and, you know, hey, who's the strongest kid, this type of thing. Like, there's always, especially for boys, there's a little bit of a pecking order that naturally becomes established, right? And you know, for the especially for the boys where it matters to them, it is a big deal, right? So like you get drawn into it. I think that for all of us, like, and you know, I would say like Eddie, myself, these type of guys, you've been drawn into that in a competitive environment for a very long time. And so it's like, all right, well, what's the next thing? And Eddie's obviously gone a lot harder with the fighting and, you know, that type of thing, but it's just, he wants to measure himself. So it's no different in a lot of ways. Like, as you get to the top levels in anything, it's no different than an arm wrestling at a lunch table in a school, right? Just like, hey, let's figure out who's stronger. Let's figure out who's better. But it's that competitive nature that will drive that. So it's a very fascinating thing to see, you know, everybody's involvement. Just to go back to you a little bit, like after that point where your dad's taking you to all those tournaments and you're meeting somebody like Bill Hunt, you know, and having that experience, at what point for you, like, was the bug completely in you at that point and you were like hardcore 15, 16, 17? Like,
it was. This is going to be quite a nice segue into some stuff, mate. And it's funny how life finds a way of marrying things up. Just as precursory, set the scene here a little bit. We talked earlier this week about, you know, what's the right way of saying this? Why I was so drawn to and identified with yourself, Eddie, and the struggle of coming from one discipline, from one place, and trying to upskill yourself, get to somewhere else. So when I got involved with arm wrestling, the whole sport in the UK, which was a relatively small scene, comparatively small, 200-300 guys, most of it was based in the south of England. So I live in the northwest. I'm like an hour outside Manchester. London was really the commercial base of and centralised base of the sport of arm wrestling in the UK. And I'm just a kid. So I'm trying to break into that, and I find that I am very isolated. At this point, didn't drive. Nobody should show me anything. So I would go to, and I was very, I don't know whether you've seen this in other sports, but it was kind of like quite cliquey. There was a niche element there, and it's quite cliquey, and it's when you're in the group, you're in the crowd, fine, but until you break in there, it can be. I don't know whether intimidating is the right word. Maybe it is, but it certainly was. It was hard to get in there and to get that recognition, and I could see that there were a group of guys there who were dominant, and they knew a little bit. At the time, it seemed like they knew a great deal, but they actually didn't. But it was a little intimidating to me, and they were reluctant to let me in. I don't know why. Maybe it was just because I was from the north of England and it's the north-south divide thing, you know. But because I was a lone wolf, I was on my own, they were not overly welcoming in that respect. And now you're probably starting to see the marry up, you know.
Sure.
So I was very focused and, as I say, very fortunate that my dad was as supportive as he was and that he would facilitate me travel. So he took me to the Paris-Bercy Stadium in the late 80s, early 90s to watch the event there. He'd let me go to the Worlds, Europeans. We had to qualify, and then I'd go to the Worlds and Europeans representing the UK. It was weird because we're there with Team Great Britain and nobody would sit with me and my dad.
That's wild. So even at that point,
yeah,
outside.
I'm very much an outsider.
Wow.
I'm there in the Team Great Britain shirt, but I'm very much not part of the team, if that makes sense. They have their little clique, and I'm a kid. So, interestingly, I meet key individuals, guys like Andrew Rhodes, who was an absolutely, I'm going to say he was the first international arm wrestling superstar. He was the guy that was cooler than everybody else, more capable than everybody else, more technically proficient, had an aura. And when I'm a 13-year-old kid, he was much more welcoming and showed more interest in me than anyone from Great Britain.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't it? I got a little bit of I took a little bit of flack from Team Great Britain at that time because to me, I'm just a puppy. I'm not aware of any of the sort of political stance on anything or how I should be or whether, you know, I should be just supporting the arm wrestler from the UK. I just was drawn towards the aura of Andrew Rhodes. I see Cobra go up and he's arm wrestling against the late Rod Linnett, great arm wrestler from the UK, forerunner of the sport, excellent puller. Very, very powerful lad, very strong. Andrew dominated him. He beat him and this was a guy in Rod Linnett. Rod was the best of the British. He was the best of us. He was the man. And I'd watched him decimate the competition all around the UK, rather than not only in his weight class. He was a middleweight, around 85 kilos, so 187 pounds in US speak, and he was absolutely dominant, bristling with confidence, borderline arrogance, but in a good way. Felt that he couldn't lose, and he backed it up. And then to see him face Cobra, Andrew Rhodes, and to see all that confidence, all that bravado stripped back and just torn to pieces by a guy that aesthetically looked nothing special. Thin, rangy, wiry, sinewy guy. And he just tore through Rod with absolute ease. And I was fascinated.
Yeah.
I remember looking at Cobra as he came off the stage after that match. And I didn't want Rod to lose, but I can tell you right now, when Cobra Rhodes stepped off that stage that day, I definitely wanted him to win. I wanted him to win every time I saw him arm wrestle after that. And he walked past me, and I was looking right at him.
Yep.
And he obviously saw, okay, we got a little kid here looking at me, like, and he just winked at me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow.
I got it.
He acknowledged me as he walked through the crowd, you know. And after the competition, I went up to Cobra, and I'm standing by the practice table, and he's arm wrestling with some super heavyweight guys, actually. There was a guy called Zawa Shadadze. He's like a 130 kilo, 6'5", powerfully built Georgian puller. And they're having a little side bet after the overalls. And Cobra weighs 180 pounds at that time, there or thereabouts. He was light for the class, really lean. And he was contesting this match with Zawa and was in it, you know. Finishes the match, turns around, and I'm standing right there watching again, and he's like, oh, it's the kid from earlier today. And he says, you want to try? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, come on. So I go on, and I start to, and he says, okay, and I start to arm wrestle. And he said, no, let me show you. And he starts to teach me a little. And suddenly, I was like, wow. So he starts to show me a little more and a little more. And there was at that time it was a VHS video, right? So as a video came out, you could buy it through the Arm Bender magazine. It was a magazine you could write off to the World Arm Wrestling Federation and order this thing. So I ordered the tape. I'll never forget, I was so excited the tape landed, and this is the Geneva World Championships, and I put that thing in, and I watched every match that Cobra pulled, and I watched his body movement, the movement dynamic, how he addressed the table, what he did, where his direction was. I would freeze frame it, rewind it, freeze frame it, rewind it, every coil, every nuance. And changed everything for me. Changed everything, mate. I was saving up money. I worked at a petrol station. I just wanted to go to work, save money, go arm wrestle, win, invest it back into going to another place. And I started to go to the US. And I met guys like Bert Whitfield. Cobra showed me other stuff. I would travel to Sweden. I'd meet with Andreas Rundstrom, who was a technical forerunner. This guy was a torchbearer. He had his own style of arm wrestling. And I would immerse myself, show me everything. Just shut up and listen. Let him show me stuff. And slowly but surely I began to piece together my own style. And that changed my stars, mate.
That's crazy. I mean, it's like as a young kid to have, you know, that type of experience where you're on the outside with Team Great Britain, right? Like it's like, you know, you're here, but we don't really maybe want you to be part of the team, and then like to gravitate towards somebody like that, and then for that type of individual to be like, hey, come up and let me show you a couple things, right? Like, and then it's just like this path opened up, but also I would argue that probably what he saw in you was special, right? So it's like, and your attitude of learning, it's always easier when somebody is excited, wanting to learn, wanting to progress, right? And you can feed off of that.
Sure.
It's an easy thing to feed off of. And, you know, when you're, you know, in the sport, and I would say like just coming into it within strongman, maybe to go back to that a little bit, there are certain things that are figured out that are shared. And then other times it's like, you know, I would figure things out. And if guys asked me, I would tell them, right? Like even the best guys in the world, I would tell them. And the reason for that is I wanted them to bring their best they possibly could. And I wanted to beat them at their best.
Absolutely.
Right. So, but otherwise, like if people were not inquisitive about that or too, proud or whatever to be like, oh, I know everything. If they had that type of attitude, well, it's not like if they would come and ask and say, hey, Brian, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'm maybe struggling with this or that. I would always try to be in a place of sharing knowledge, if I could, right? And I think that it would be the same thing with a young, let's just say somebody young getting into strongman. Mm-hmm. Hey, what advice could you offer me? I'm having trouble with this or trouble with that. Like, it would be fun for me to share that, right? Yeah. Like, I like that. It's not like I'm going to ever hold that back. That, and I'm not everybody, of course, but for somebody like that to see somebody like you that's excitable, I'm sure it's fun for him. Yeah. Right? Fun to like, hey, check this out. Like, and I'm sure at that point he had put a ton of work into his craft and where he was at and what he had done. And, to be able to pass that on and share that is something special as well. Mm-hmm. But it's so neat to hear that. It's really cool to hear how, like, that experience, it shaped your journey. And
I was very lucky, mate.
It's very cool.
Very lucky to come across someone who was so approachable.
Yeah.
At such a level within the sport, certainly to me, extremely approachable guy. I mean, our most celebrated champion right now, the most popular arm wrestler, for those who aren't purists of the sport, follow it, is No Limits, Devon Larratt. Mm. And I actually started Devon's career in Supermatch arm wrestling. I'm extremely proud of Devon, and more so than... Well, this point is that I'm most proud of him for that fact. He is an extraordinarily approachable individual. If you're around Devon and you're ever in an event, he's the last guy to leave after taking photographs, doing autographs, but also going on the table with people. With this last event we did, there was a fella came over with his son from the Isle of Man. And obviously Devon's the biggest star there. He wants to spend time with him, and Devon's having a big match there, very important match. And many times you may see that athlete not be as approachable because they need to be in that place. They need to be separate. They need to be secular and keep themselves to themselves. But Devon, no, he was incredibly approachable. Says to the kid, yeah, come sit down, hang out with us. And I was looking across at this kid, and he never takes his eyes off Devon. Whatever Devon says, whatever Devon does, he's there with this wide-eyed look like he's sat next to a superhero, I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah. It's such a neat thing, man. And I don't want to, with that being said, it's like your attitude towards it was a driving force, right? Like, so everything that was done there, I would argue is you opened yourself up to it, and that's why it came, right? So like you open yourself up to the knowledge, and then you also traveled a lot to gain knowledge. Yeah. We're open to listening, but you come into it with a listen first attitude. And I think that's another, point. And anybody out there, it's always better to listen first, right? Just be willing to listen.
For sure.
Right? Because if you're willing to do that at whatever level you're at, then you can analyze what's said. And if you can take knowledge from it, then you take knowledge from it. And if it's something that isn't something you need to listen to, then you can discard it, right? But until you hear what's said, right, I would say most men that are wise are going to listen first, right, rather than talk first, always, right? So it's, unless they're asked something, of course, and then they're sharing knowledge, but it's, it's a good quality to have. So like you open yourself up to that because you're seeking it, right? It's a vision of where you want to go in the world, right? And so it's kind of like you have to mentally be in a spot where you're open to receiving that knowledge. And then, I would argue that because you put that out to the world, I guarantee that was the vibe you were putting out. Like, I want to learn and absorb everything I possibly can. That's why it became available to you, right? And then you ran with it from there.
I think it's funny, isn't it? If you look into every athlete in any sport discipline, they're always, to some extent, a product of their environment, a product of their education within life, within sport. And from my perspective, I was sort of led down a path many times in my life by absolute necessity. Didn't sort of have another route, you know what I mean? So, of course, you've got to have a degree of natural talent. You've got to have that. But when you look at the route that you take to reach the summit of your sport, whatever that aspiration is, to achieve your goal, often you never pause for thought and think, how the hell did I get here? You follow this route, and it winds and it twists and it goes up and it goes down, and suddenly you end up somewhere. And it's quite interesting at times to be able to breathe for a second and look back. And I'll be honest with you, mate, during this week, during this few days we've had together, I've done a lot of the reflecting on that, because you think to yourself, I've been trying to pace what I did with you, trying to articulate all of the elements we're going to work on in a concise manner and not go too detailed, because I was very conscious of the fact we've got a very short period of time, window of opportunity to work on some of this stuff, and I wanted it to be as impactful as possible. So I was almost trying to retrace my own steps and think, right, what should we do that's going to give the maximum impact for you as an individual to see it, if that makes any sense,
Yep. One, and that's, obviously become apparent. It's, there's levels to anything, mm-hmm. right? And I think that it's important for people to understand, as you're getting into something, every champion has to start at the bottom, so to speak, right? Like you have to build a foundation. I always use the analogy of stacking bricks, right? You have to stack the bricks. You have to stack the bricks to build the building. So you don't get to start with half of the bricks stacked. Mm-hmm. You got to start at the bottom if you want to climb up. So I think that, starting where we have for sure, man, is made a lot of sense. And, arm wrestling is it's a very, very unique endeavor, right? And it would be very much like, there's for example, in the MMA world, there's different coaches that can communicate very effectively.
Yeah.
And again, you have to start with your first steps there. Like, where are you going to go? You got to build it from the ground up. And, it's just one of those type of deals. And so within arm wrestling, and we were kind of talking earlier about like how far you get down the road, because you want to go have fun. And that's the end thing. It's like the mechanics of shooting a basketball.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to just go shoot the basketball, but there's a lot of mechanics behind doing it correctly. So are you willing to learn the mechanics before you go shoot the basketball, mm-hmm. right? Same thing with doing a big lift. Like, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier with strong individuals. You get them in a gym and there's a bar and there's plates, and maybe they've never lifted before, but they're really strong from working on a farm or something, manual labor. So it's like, oh, well, you're strong. Let's just have you lift. But then if you don't care about the form they're lifting with, they go and lift and then they might mess themselves up, or it's too far. And so I think what's happened in some regards with me within arm wrestling is it's exciting to arm wrestle, right? It's exciting to go back to that lunchroom table or whatever, to be like, hey, let's put your arms down and let's go. The thing is, though, to progress to a higher level within the sport, you have to have the foundation. So it's peeling it back to that. And I think that, if we're being honest, I think it's just been too much of, I've had some guys in and they've had certainly knowledge. Like, it's not like they don't have knowledge at all, right? And it's exciting to put your arm down and arm wrestle on the table. And then within that, maybe try to show stuff. But again, that's probably level 10 stuff where I needed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up, right? Like, I need to learn that stuff first. And I think that's what's been neat, is to peel that back and with the knowledge that you gained, throughout your career, be able to take that and absorb that, right? And I think that's what's really neat with me in that regard. But I want to know with you, okay, how did you progress once you got to that point that you were traveling, like, to these bigger tournaments and like developing your style?
Yeah.
How did, because you're going back, taking in the knowledge that you got, going back and applying it to yourself, developing your strategy, your training, the ways you're going to get better, the ways that you're going to arm wrestle on the table. So what's fascinating to me is like how you took all of that and then refined it. And was it just a trial and error type of deal? that you did, or how did you come up with your system? Because it's very unique.
It is very unique. To be honest, it was driven by necessity. It was, I'll give you an example. I'm analytical by nature. Obviously, I think with the fight sport background, that my sort of what I'd seen, and I spoke a moment about the productivity environment kind of thing. I'd always seen progress was achieved more fluidly, more efficiently when you broke down all the elements within the sport, all those disparate elements. You just view them, categorize them, and see which ones marry up with you the best. So when I started arm wrestling, I was very much as everybody is, I suppose, I was very much a power-based arm wrestler. I was chasing that alpha male, let's be stronger than the next guy. So I would go to the national championships, I'd go to the Europeans, I'd go to the Worlds or any international competition, and I would hit the hook. I love to hook. There's a visceral feeling about that, and it was great, and I got very strong in that position. I remember I got into a match when I was a young man with a very powerful arm wrestler, Georgian puller, and Burt Whitfield from the USA, old arm wrestler, passed away now, God rest him, but he was sat at the side of the table, and I remember I had a lot of admiration for him, as everybody did. And Burt was sat there, he's watching me, and I get into this crazy brutal match with this Georgian puller. And about 1 minute 20 seconds, 1 minute 30 seconds later, I win the match, and I was ecstatic. I'm jumping about, and I'm, doing everything wrong, blowing all my energy out of the window. And I walk down the stairs from the stage back towards where my teammates were waiting, and I catch eyes with Burt Whitfield. And I knew Burt not well, but he was always a lovely guy with me, very approachable lad. And he said, "Don't know what you were celebrating so hard for. You going home next round?" And I remember thinking, "Oh God, that was a cutting statement," but it wasn't really. It was absolute fact. He said, "Tell you what, mate, you better find how to be more efficient in this sport, or you're going to win nothing. You ever want to be the guy taking the gold medal? That's what you want to be doing." So that hammered home. That really hammered home, because you know what? I did go home next 2 rounds against lesser opponents, but I'm completely gassed out, shut me down. And I'd had this experience and lived this experience a few times where I'd had a hard match, got locked up in a long pole, gone home very shortly after. So I realised that in order to be efficient in that format, what we call the main draw format of arm wrestling, so it's effectively a knockout competition, you got to finish the thing quick. You got to put it away. So the next day I went back to the world competition, and I'm watching, and I see a Bulgarian arm wrestler in the 154s. And I watch this kid, and he's absolutely clinical, crazy fast, crazy efficient. Every match he arm wrestles is over before it began. Kid's name was Svetan Gashevsky. And I think to myself, look at that guy. Arms aren't particularly long. Hands aren't particularly big for the class. He's not a tall guy. He's not massively heavily muscular. How the hell is he doing that? So same thing. I start to go over. I approach Svetan. I talk to him. Start to analyze him. Watch what he's doing. And I realize that he's using a lot of feints and a lot of anticipation, and he's very well rounded. And he's taking different lanes, and he's doing it at blistering speed. Now, I'd experienced a little bit of that from what Andrew Rhodes used to do, very, very fast. And so I start to think, okay, I need to find a way of incorporating that into my game. And it set me off on a pattern, on a chain of thought. Remember when I used to box, my boxing coach said to me, "Oh, you're chasing the knockout too much. You're trying to swing for the fences every time. Just let it come, let it flow. The opportunity will present itself. Don't chase it. When it presents itself, take it, and don't try to skin everything. Just let it flow, because if you connect accurately, you'll get what you're looking for." And the first time I ever knocked a guy out, it felt like I didn't hit him hard. I wasn't
just connected.
Just connected wonderfully. And folding him in half. And I remember thinking, wow, it's not I'd seen it in my mind, you know. And it's these lessons that I started to think, right, I need to be much more, I need to have a great deal more finesse and think about what I'm doing here. My dad was very, very thought-driven, very cerebral. He used to, I always remember, he'd make tools or make something to achieve an end when he was building something. Say he'd build all kinds of things at home. We had a bit of land there and he'd build various things, and sometimes he'd position like a giant stone on something and I looked at how he'd achieved it and how he'd moved it, and he'd always come up with some ingenious way of utilizing levers and various other things to position stuff, and always used to talk to me that the biggest muscle you're ever going to have is your brain, is the mind. And that resonated with me. And I started to think, what I need to do is adapt my arm wrestling style to be as efficient as I possibly can. Adapt it to suit my body style, not for me to go out and try to emulate someone who had no similarities to myself.
Makes sense.
I came up with sort of my own little mantra, where I would always think, well, arm wrestling is about from here to here, from head to hand. How do I do this? How do I make my leverage better? And over time, I started to play with that and form that. And when I started to go into a different system of arm wrestling, which is known as outside arm wrestling or top rolling, if you look at my genetic makeup, it's poor for that. Relatively normal hand, not a long forearm, and I'm pulling it. I'm like 6'1", I'm not a particularly big guy. I'm pulling in the 187 class. So I thought maybe I need to cut down in weight. I go down in weight a little bit. I try to make myself very large at the weight class. I start to look at things in a great deal more detail than I ever had before. And as I did that, the success came, and it improved, and it improved, and it improved. And the more diligence I had in the preparation, the more I took control of the factors which were going to influence matches, the more my success came. When you become national champion, you become European champion, suddenly you're at the World Championship finals, you win the World Championships, and you look back at the journey, and every time you lose a match, you need to understand why. In my case, I had numerous silver medals at World Championships, second place, came up short, and I had a very clear understanding that it was down to my frailties, mental usually. I bottled it basically, made a mistake, did something wrong. And so I started to look at the sport a little bit differently and try to make my own tests within a test, if that makes sense, sure. You know? So I wouldn't look at necessarily the end game. I'd look at trying to, one match at a time, and try to achieve some increment within that match and sort of reward myself, or look back and punish myself if I wasn't able to achieve that. And it was that sort of measurable dynamic that made me enjoy the sport more and made me work more diligently.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. To break it into that type of detail, and then, for you to find things that were motivating to you, mm-hmm. and the way that made it fun, right? Like that brings everything to life. I
think it helps, doesn't it? Yeah, I think if you can, I think anything in life, if you're excited by it, if you can see an end goal, if you look into it and you think to yourself, you know what, there's the summit, it's right there, and you can visualize it. And sometimes by making the steps towards that peak, towards that pinnacle, that little bit clearer, that little bit more visible, your path towards it becomes, you've more hope. It creates hope, yep. And certainly in my career and the way that I try to coach now, it's very much orientated around that. It's based around that belief, around that, and I try to subset things out. I try to create different paths and change them up. So as you start to progress, because I go into a great deal of detail, I've got an awareness that can be tedious. It can be problematic, that it can break your head down. So you need to have different forms and subsets that you'll take on at different times. And if you think about that and you map them out, you can actually make it advantageous so it fits together, almost like a jigsaw. an athletic discipline jigsaw where you look at, this is what I need to work, and you can move pieces. And it begins to articulate the technique heading into each match.
Yeah, and when you break it down at pieces like that, it makes it more digestible. And I think that, for a lot of people, they may have a really big goal, right? They set a really big goal. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's easy to set a big goal, right? Like, if you truly believe it and it scares you a little bit, it's probably a pretty good goal to go after, right? Like, you're scared of it. But the thing that I think that a lot of people get off track and they don't ever reach that goal is because it's too far away, mm-hmm. right? Like, it's too big of a goal. And it's what you just said right there. It's the steps. Like, how are you breaking down the steps to get there?
Yeah.
So that you're having these small wins along the way in the process of getting there.
Yeah. Right? Gives you a little encouragement.
Yeah. Because if you're aimlessly working toward a massive goal of, well, let's just say I want to be the world champion, right? Okay, awesome. What is it going to take to get there, right? And then what do you have to do along the way to get there? And then every single day, what are you doing to get better every single day? Mm-hmm. And then when you break it down to that point, there's choices even within every single day that you make. And then you start to think about every single choice. Is this getting me closer or further away from where I'm trying to go?
Yeah.
Right. And when, and this isn't for everybody, I'm not saying it is for everybody, but when you are on that journey, when you are on that path, it makes sense. It makes sense, but it only has to make sense to you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. So, it's now I can understand where you're coming from because you walk that path in arm wrestling, but it was the stuff you were doing every single day, breaking everything down, analyzing everything. You're obsessed with it. You have to be obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And the passion has to come through. So you have that passion, you have that obsession, but to you it makes sense, right? So every single thing you're doing, it's just no different than my career. Every single choice, right? Like, down to the smallest detail, was that getting me better, right? What food, what was I drinking? Was I drinking enough? Was I recovering enough? Was I sleeping enough? What could I have done more in that day? It's quite literally perfection. It needs to be as close to perfection as possible to achieve what you want. And when you break it down like that, again, it depends on what you're going after, but you should have something you're trying to push yourself toward getting better each and every day. I think for every single person, that is, right? Like, if you're aimlessly, you don't have any direction, anything you're trying to go after, and it doesn't need to be some world champion goal. Doesn't need to be that. But it's like, hey, you got something small you're trying to go after, you achieve. Maybe it's getting better, in your personal life, getting better in your work life, getting better at a skill, whatever that might be, a hobby, let's just say that's something that's important. You can do things to break that down. And it's a great thing. I would argue great thing mentally to have that outlet where you're working towards something, right?
I think the mental thing is huge, Brian. And I think you hit on a really good point there, mate, because if you are mentally motivated or trying to maintain that mental motivation is probably 60% of the battle. You can achieve so much, anyone can achieve so much in an area if they are able to commit to that and to give it their all, to give it their focus. How many times do you hear an athlete say, oh, well, I haven't been able to, I'm not at my best because of, and there are a myriad of reasons why they couldn't get in there. It's injury, it's distraction, it's something else came up. If you're able to give it 100% of your time, if you're able to motivate yourself to get in there when you feel like you shouldn't, it is an enormous difference maker. And the more consistent you can be, it's shocking how far you can come. I've always been of that sort of mindset that people overestimate what they can achieve in a short time, but they underestimate what they can achieve in a long time. I mean, when you came into the sport, everybody throwing in the the immediate assumption, Levon Slayer and this and that and the other. And when you look at that, for them to then start saying, in 2 years, he beat Levon in 1 year, it's unrealistic. You have got to look at giving the guy the tools to do that. What will we do as a sport to empower a Brian Shaw to come in and get to that level? If nobody's prepared to give you the tools to raise your level, then you're stunted before you get started. I know for a fact from dealing with you for the last couple of days, never mind from watching your career, but what I'll say to everybody, the fans of Shaw Strength, the fans of Brian, you're going to be here for different reasons. But I know a lot of you, there's consistent themes and veins and assumptions and perceptions running through who Brian Shaw is. And one of the most consistent that I've ever seen is that you are very diligent, very professional. As Eddie Hall said, the first professional strongman, he holds you in the highest of regard, as does Hooper and so many more. But that consistent theme is so true. I mean, the diligence, the humility, the focus, and the genuine commitment you've shown in this last 4 days, when I know it's been hurting you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was ridiculous. You went above and beyond. For someone who has achieved what you've achieved in strength sport, to be so open to learn, to be so willing to sort of just come in, strip it all back and give your all. And I've seen you with your family. I've been fortunate enough to be welcomed here to your house and to see how you are and speak to your lady, and she tells me how obsessed you are. And I've lived it. I've seen it. And I have absolutely no doubt of why you are 4-time world's strongest man, mate. It's very, very evident from working with you for a few days. And in my honest opinion, I think to myself, you go as far as you want to go in this game, or probably any other that you've given your mind to.
Yeah.
And I really do believe that. For anybody out there that doubts what you can achieve, I'm a believer now. I genuinely think you can do a tremendous amount in this sport. I really do, because you've progressed enormously, and much more importantly, the focus and the dedication is world class. It's that simple. It is world class. It's exciting.
It really is, man. It'll be fun, right? Like, that's the journey. And I think that's anybody's journey. And that's, going to setting a goal. Well, of course, I still want to set goals for myself, right? I still want to achieve things. And I think it's something where, and I think I said this to you, last fall, I had my introduction to the International Sports Hall of Fame, which is a big honor, to have that bestowed upon me and be in that position.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, right? And it's always, the question of, I guess, maybe in life or in sport or whatever, like what you've achieved and where are you comfortable, right? Like, where are you comfortable? And I know in a lot of capacities, I've been given gifts for sure, right? Like, there's, size and strength and, the mental side of things where I approach different situations and goal setting and discipline. Like, all of these things, I've been given, I've developed, I've worked hard to develop, but again, to approach arm wrestling, I was always thinking this way. It wasn't, and I think that, people get excited, and it's awesome. To be fair, it is completely awesome to have people excited about it. I want people to be excited, right? Like, I wanted them to be excited about strongman, and when I'm competing in strongman, and, now joining arm wrestling and having my first match under my belt, like that type of stuff. It's a lot of fun. And to set goals, but like the drive, I guess, for me, it's fun to direct that, direct it and be able to go in that direction. And, what we've been able to go through here has me more excited now because there's more structure to what I'm doing and what I will do, and I'll be able to measure myself and my progress, which is huge, right? So for somebody like me, that is great because, you know, I don't want to say I've kind of, I think what I said to you is like taking more of a shotgun approach to getting better, where it's like I'm going to kind of try everything. Almost, you know, at the beginning, it's like, well, maybe this works, maybe that works. I'll try this. Maybe I saw this guy do this. Let's see if it works for me. Yeah. You know, so you're trying to gather that knowledge, if you will, and bring it all in. But in any instance, it would be no different than me working with somebody within Strongman if they were completely beginning right now. Yep. Right. Like I could save that person a tremendous amount of time where I had to develop things through trial and error. Sure. It would be much easier because you already have the knowledge base. So now with you, where we're coming in, it's like you already have the knowledge base. You're willing to share the knowledge base, which is incredible. Then I get to learn from that, right? So it's in my mind, I'm like, okay, yeah, certain parts of it are going to be hard. I like that. I like the challenge. I like the discipline. I like that, right? I thrive on that, and I need it. It feeds a certain part of my soul, I think, to have that type of discipline in my day. Right? Yeah. So it's just what I do. And, you know, people have heard me talk about that type of stuff where I seek out hard things to do to keep myself sharp. Right. Yes. So it's just like, you know, every single day I either start with a cold shower or cold tub, just cold. Is it going to be comfortable? Nope. But every single day I get to have my first thing in the day is like I did something hard. Boom. I forced myself to do it. And every single day I don't want to do that, right? It'd be the same thing with getting better with this, but I seek out that type of discipline to get better with it. And I think that, you know, a lot of the things that you have shared with me and that you have developed, like, I think the fascinating part to me is, you know, and I don't want this, you know, I know we're talking and you're coming over to coach me and we have to talk a little bit. People want to know for sure. But it's like, what's fascinating to me is some of the stuff that you shared with me with the training and the things that you've done, like the mindset that you had to live in to do that day in and day out, as you shared with me, is like, well, it doesn't matter if it's Christmas, it doesn't matter if it's New Year, whatever, like I'm doing it, right? To be the best, to get to the pinnacle. That's what's always fascinating for me, right? With this process. So it's coming from a guy that's been there and done that and backed it up, right? So that's what's fascinating. So as I'm going through and learning these things from you, I'm like, well, you know, it's not like you haven't done it or it's coming from theory that hasn't been applied. Does that make sense? It does, mate. One of the things, as I say, that I was very keen to do, and obviously, as you now know, I try to put into all of my coaching is, if you've got a situation where, as I was this weekend, I'm coming over into sort of a new environment and I'm working with a new set of guys, people that I've not worked with before, and they can see me as I am now, old man, out of shape, don't train anymore, but I need to be able to back up what I say. 100%. I need to be able to give evidence, raw evidence of, okay, I'm going to make a claim now that this is possible. Let me show you. And we had some guys come in this weekend and obviously question me on that, and I wanted to give real live demonstration of the efficiency. Yep. And I think that's pretty powerful. If you can pull that together and let people see it, feel it, it's not a myth. It's not just purely conceptual. You show it and you allow them to see how that is viable and how it pieces together with the training, which will all form that circle. And it will allow them to advance in different areas. And that's been rewarded, is rewarding, to have the guys that have come here, some of who are very experienced arm wrestlers, and you show them some of that and you see that excitement in their eyes that they didn't know that was possible. They didn't know that you could achieve that. And I've really enjoyed that, mate. So thank you. Yeah, it's been wonderful, man. It's been wonderful. What do you think the funnest, do you have moments in your career that were like looking back that you are the most fond of, the most proud of? I'm going to tell you that things like this are right up there. Working with, Eddie, close personal friend for many years outside of the sports.
that whole scenario, the lead up to the match with yourself.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, poacher turn gamekeeper, isn't it? I started in that respect. To be fair to people won't know, but to be fair to Brian, maybe as soon as the match was announced, I remember you messaged me. I've still got the message, and it says, I know you're working with Eddie for this match.
Yep.
But hopefully you'd be happy to work with me sometime down the tracks. And I said, absolutely, mate, no problem at all. Yeah, obviously, we knew each other anyway from the strongman scene. But it's great to be able to experience this kind of thing, to come over. I mean, I'll be honest with you, mate. Today, and we went back on the table, right? After you've done, we did all the brush your teeth stuff.
Yep.
Which people are going to be able to see on your channel. They're going to be able to
check it out
to see what that is. And we just, off spec, as walking past the table, we didn't plan to do it. And we just said, you know what, just let's get on here and I bet it feels different. And what are we? This is 2.5 days in to doing that. And to be fair, yesterday you had less opportunity than the other lads to spend a lot of time doing that because we were trying to allow you to finish the weekend, that you wouldn't be destroyed.
Sure.
So with, what's a realistic assessment? 1.5 to 2 days of actual exposure to the movement dynamics, and we just jumped on the table without any plan, and you'd gone from a 3 to a 7.
Sure.
And you could feel it, and I could feel it. Your fluidity was just different. That is great. When something like that happens, and you can just completely get hold of, wow, what a difference we've made. And I could see in your face, you were thinking, whoa.
Starting to come,
that is different. And I don't know, you tell me, but it felt like you were excited. Man, I was absolutely bristling.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's it's not, there's a lot of work to go. I'll say that first, right? But like to see it start to piece together, and we've only been working a couple days here, so it's not a lot, but mapping out in my head what needs to happen and how it needs to happen, that's going to be huge, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's, again, it's like my thought process, and this just is how it works for me, but like I'm thinking about it. So again, I'm kind of retracing. Where am I going to go? How should this feel? And again, the PowerPoints we talked about, all that stuff. So it's like, all right, cool. So you're almost mentally mapping it, even though I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And then that's how a lot of things in my mind, it's like, I don't stop ever really thinking about it, but that's kind of what it needs to be.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're not trying to go like what we're talking about. And I mean, it's obviously, with people investing in me, right? Like in me investing in myself, but like the time that you're taking away to come invest in me to get me better is huge. Right. And I said to you, like, I'm going to give it I'm going to give it everything I can. Right. So it's not a, like a small investment. Right. So it's like, all right, yes, I am going to be very focused when we're doing it, but then you think about it, you mentally map it outside of that as well, right? So your brain doesn't really stop. So then when you get back on, it should be, it's like leaving the basketball court. I would never, ever walk off the court until I made a shot and it felt the right way, right? So, but it was that leaving with that feeling. Then hopefully you come back into the gym, you shoot, again, warm up, it feels that same way, feels the same way. Because you could just feel, with the basketball when you shot it the right way, and the way that it left your hand, the way that it sat, like it just was perfect, right? But that would be what I would do. It was just a thing. Like I would not leave. And if, just, that type of traction. But with this, it's a different thing because it should feel a certain way.
Yes.
Same thing with lifts and strongman. There's certain times where you hit a line with the lift and it's perfect, and other times it's off. And it's just like you want to leave with a good lift the way that it should feel, so that then when you leave the gym, you're replaying that in your head. You're having that same feeling. So very much with this, I think I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now that I know what I should feel, it's going to be much easier to say like, hey, I like that feeling. Let's do that. Right. And in everything I'm doing, I'm going to just try to replay that. Not that it's going to be perfect right away. It will get better, but the more connected it gets, those levels will jump.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I think that's exciting. So it's neat to obviously hear what you're saying and, you know, that type of thing. And you know, it's going to be fun, man. It's fun. And you're going to have in this game, you know, I'm sure there's people that doubted you at certain points, like on what you could accomplish. And sure. Like, you know, you've said yourself, like, look at like what I have. It's not like you've got the biggest hand in the world or longest arm, but you were able to dominate guys that were bigger than you. And I'm sure in some instances, potentially stronger than you in certain areas.
Oh,
but
yeah.
You're faster, you're more dynamic. You're like, and you're solving this chess game, which is really neat. Like, and it's like, I know that the fun part of this for me is all of the knowledge you have. We're just literally at level 1 of where we're just building the base.
Well, it's kind of like we're building, so to clarify for your viewers and the Sure Strength fans, what we're doing here is kind of a hybrid.
Yeah.
Because you are, by your very nature, differently strong, differently big. I mean, the other night we're in the restaurant. We go out for a steak and James is sat over there behind the monitor. He was sat on the side of it. These 2 girls walked past. And they walk past the back of Brian. Brian's just about to sit down. And you can see they both look at him. And I'm around the corner. I just come out of the restroom. And as they walk around the corner and they get clear of where Brian is, this girl looks at the owner and she goes, "That's the biggest man I have ever seen in my life." And I'm like smiling to myself. So it's very obvious to anybody looking in. You're a very big boy. Usually, that type of individual comes into any game, there is an expectation that their style, the manner in which they approach the match, is going to be 100% power focused. That is what it's going to be. My style of arm wrestling has been much more about movement, anticipation, dynamism, fluidity. When we put those two together, you create a different thing. Now, wind the clock back to October 2024, and I get a call from Eddie Hall.
Yeah.
And he says, "Look, we've got 7 weeks. I've signed up. I'm going to be arm wrestling Brian." So, a week later, me being me, I'm looking for Brian Shaw footage, and I'm looking to see anything I can of you arm wrestling. Anything. What have we got? What can I analyze? And I start looking at this, and I think, okay, Brian's way bigger, stronger, but he's not moving well. Maybe he's too big. Because an arm wrestling table is what it is. It's a set size, and it's built to suit someone of about 6 feet. And I think maybe he's too big. Maybe he can't move. And everyone has this same thing. So our approach is, we're going to do what we do. We're going to move better. We're going to arm wrestle you. We're going to be better, faster, and try and use the weapons we've got. So it's going to be the Viper against the Mountain. It's going to be the speed, the boxer, not the puncher. And I'll be honest with you, mate. Coming out here, I wasn't sure. I didn't know whether you would be able to move in the required manner. I didn't know where we would be able to structure the approach and the training. And I had a perception and an expectation of what we would have to do to get you where we needed to go. For everybody who's a fan of Brian Shaw, I can tell you, I was wrong, 100%. The only reason that Brian has not been moving or looked better at the table is because he hadn't had access to the right lanes. Watch what's coming.
It's going to be fun, man. It really is going to be fun. Like, there's been several moments where it's just mapping it out again, right? And I'm gonna thrive on that for sure. But it's just, again, it's gonna come through repetitive practice and, you know, that type of thing. And I think, you know, I'm even right now, like I've shared with you, it's like, okay, I am, you know, and a big part of this, we can talk about this. Like I very much want to build myself to be the best physical version of myself to be an arm wrestler.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, you know, people have, you know, I don't know if they've questioned it or whatever, but it's like, okay, well, I was like, well, after King of the Table, I wasn't super happy. I wasn't moving great. And I was like, you know what? Like, I want to get leaner. I want to drop fat. I want to see how I move. Cause I think if I can move better, this is going to be a big benefit to arm wrestling. But
no doubt.
Big guys, a lot of times, big guys, when they're big, it's their identity. It's everything to them. And they're like, you know what? I'm not going to drop any weight. Like that's just not going to happen. So they hold on to it. So it's like but also if you step back, and this is part of just who I am, I think. But if I step back, I always built myself to be the best physical version of myself for strongman, right? To be the best strongman that I could be based on the events that were there.
Sure.
That was always part of it. It's like my body is the machine that needs to do the work. Mm-hmm. Here's the work. Therefore, the machine needs to be this, right? So that was the approach. And you know, I was kind of in this weird spot with obviously starting to train arm wrestling and having the guys come and whatever, but you're bringing in more of a strongman body, if you will, and putting it at an arm wrestling table.
Round peg, square hole.
Yeah. And so this is where I started to question that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that was like, all right, well, what happens if I get leaner? What happens, right? You know, can I get closer to the table? Does my leverage get better? Does my movement get better? And that was, you know, what I started to question. So it's like, all right, well, I like the challenge. I haven't really gone down that path of like, let's be really disciplined with dropping fat, trying to maintain lean muscle and maintain strength for sure, but just drop down, right? And see where it goes and then see how the movement is. But I think with you this weekend, it already lasts, you know, I would say probably 3-4 weeks, whatever. It's kind of been, I made some comments to the guys where it's like, wow, guys, like I'm really connected. Like I'm so much closer to the table, like the way that I can get and, you know, where I can take my elbow and, you know, that type of stuff is just better. It feels better. I feel connected. And then I've kind of been asking them, obviously, like, hey, you know, how do I feel strength-wise? Because I don't feel like I'm getting weaker in the gym necessarily at all. But it's like on the table, they're like, God, you feel good. Like, if anything, you feel potentially better, right? Which is awesome. So now with you coming in and me being able to kind of map that movement out a little bit more, and I think it can get better. Now we can objectively look at it and say, like, what's the best version of size, body weight? You know, where do we need to put some more on? Where do we need to drop some if we needed to do that? Like, where does the strength come in and then kind of piece that puzzle together?
Well, I think you're at the stage right now, mate. You couldn't have been more accurate in the way you've approached it, because I think you're at the stage now where I want to say that strength and becoming strong are your wheelhouse. I mean, you've got as much experience as any man on earth in that respect, quite clearly. The trophies surrounding us suggest that you're pretty proficient at that. You're coming into an environment where you need to improve the movement.
Yep.
You're able to do that. You've already seen the benefits yourself. I'm interested to see that when you get very familiar with that, you know the lanes, you're feeling it all, and it becomes autopilot. That sort of, it's just a natural reaction, movement reaction. The movement dynamic is drilled in. Whether then, should you feel like we need to get stronger?
Yeah.
And that's driven by weight.
Yep.
Could you then go bigger and still do what you need to do at the table? And that is, maybe you can, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think there's a hell of a lot better chance of that happening when we've taken this phase 1 approach of leaning you out getting you moving better, and then you're very familiar with it.
Yep. I think it's only, I mean, and again, you analyze it at all points. That's what would make sense to me, right? Like is not holding on to, you know, you don't want to hold on to this spot where it's like, well, I need to be this body weight to be strong or whatever. It's how am I moving? And then if there comes a point where a video comes through or you see me moving, you're like, man, it was better a little bit ago, right? Like, where's your body weight at? And let's just say I've gone up 10 pounds or 15 pounds. Hey, it was a little bit better 5 or 10 pounds ago. Well, now we find that sweet spot of like, okay, you know, or maybe it's like maybe we pay more attention to body fat or lean mass or whatever it might be, right? But there's got to be a way to figure out that in my mind.
Without question.
Versus like, hey, this is just what I am. And I think that, you know, there's a, and again, you and I are going to have a different conversation probably than a lot of people, but within strongman, that's how I thought, right? I started to think like that. And so with arm wrestling, it will be the same exact thing. Yeah. Like I will start to have these thoughts about, well, how could we improve this? How do we improve this? And once you show me stuff, it'll be like, hey, Neil, what about this? Or what about that?
And like, you know, the interesting thing with it, mate, if you, as you mentioned to me the other day, when you're going into whatever competition, let's say it's a World's Strongest Man versus the Arnolds versus Strongest Man on Earth, whatever the promotion. For some events, they are known, say at your show, as being heavy.
Yep.
Very heavy show. You would come into that focused on those events in a very different way and with a very focused and unique preparation to achieve that end. Well, you're not going into main draw arm wrestling where it's a mixed field because you're already Brian Shaw. So everybody wants to see you in that one-on-one format. They want to see you in professional arm wrestling. So in a way, you've skipped all of that. But the benefit that gives you with doing Supermatch is that you know exactly who you're going to be arm wrestling. And we can break down their functional dynamic. We can see, is this person fast? Are they slow? Is this a guy that's a boxer or a puncher? What do we need to be to take on that individual? And that, I think, will be very good for you. I think that will be very suited to your natural psychological makeup because that's how you approach things anyway. Yeah. Always have. And I think that will actually inspire you. I think you'll enjoy the process of preparation for a specific end, for a specific opponent. Yep. Let's put that opponent on the wall. Let's write underneath what they do well, what they do not do well, and let's prepare to piece them apart. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah. I love it, man. I really, really do. It's you know, it's exciting to talk about, exciting to do. You know, it's like I just want to get to work, you know. More so,
mate. I can't. You don't need to convince me. Let me tell everybody watching this weekend. I've been backing him down. Not the other way. It's like, whoa, Brian. Yeah. Let's leave it there. Yeah. You know, you've gone to failure, mate. I'm very proud of you in that respect. It was remarkable, and thanks again for being so willing to throw yourself in there, mate.
Yeah,
very good.
A lot of fun, man. Well, I appreciate all of your time and knowledge, and you know, bringing it out and you know, sharing with people and I feel like with this talk, I was not planning on talking a lot of that, but hey, whatever. It flowed to that direction, I guess.
It's been, I think it probably, mate, it's a genuine underlining of the fact that we're both very buoyed by this, you know. You're genuinely excited. It's a fascinating project. As I said to you, you know, it's funny how things come together. We talked about this earlier in the podcast, but life has a way of taking you in certain directions. I started with the Arm Wars Titan House thing, which is very much all around that strongman crossover. And in the first instances of it, you know, I was excited to have you involved in that. We didn't have chance. Timings and diaries didn't marry up. Obviously, I've been working with Ed.
Yep.
But my God, here we go. Yep. We're on Project Brian Shaw. And Team Shaw shall be strong.
Where do you see that going, Neil? Like, talk about the Titan House and Arm Wars a little bit, like what you do.
Yeah, I mean, the Arm Wars Super Series is my promotion. So I have a couple of YouTube channels. The first one is Neil Pickup Supernatural Strength, which is very much myself and all things arm wrestling, all things me we're involved with. The second one is Arm Wars, which is a far more serious endeavour. Arm Wars is the oldest and most established supermatch arm wrestling promotion. I actually was the first person to start supermatch arm wrestling in terms of, from a televisual perspective. We had the thing on TV in 65 countries, translated into 50-odd languages, and some of the biggest, most iconic matches in the history of the sport took place in the Arm Wars Super Series. Recently, we'd taken a different direction, and my own aspiration was to try to eliminate some of the weakness of arm wrestling for the non-purist arm wrestler. So I wanted to make something which took away setup time, took away a lot of the nuance and the things that people don't readily understand, and also with a massive injection of character. So you get to follow a story. You get to see and meet the individuals who are going to be arm wrestling, understand them. I'm a firm believer in people by people.
Yeah.
Not everybody's favourite fighter is Conor McGregor. Maybe it's Randy Couture. Maybe it's someone else. You know, you like that kind of character set that those individuals had. Now, with the Titan House, we started this to try to reinvent a few things, and we weren't showing and are not showing these guys competing yet. We wanted to document their whole journey. From
just
embryo.
Kind of start to get into it.
Start to finish, mate. We would start up with this guy walks in, this girl walks in. They have never, in some cases, in the first Titan House that we've done, which we just finished, never seen an arm wrestling table before. Never seen one. But had shown interest in and spoke to me about, do you think I could be a good arm wrestler? And I thought, well, why don't we find out?
Sure.
Let's have a look at this. So we invited 4 of the strongest females in the world over to a house. We brought over 3 world champion arm wrestlers, female arm wrestlers, and myself, and we just worked them very hard through the week in exactly the format that we are doing now. We invited over people who we felt had exceptional potential, a desire to do it, and also would create that little bit of public excitement. People want to know, oh, I wonder if that guy, I wonder if that girl took it on. What could they achieve? So Mark Felix would be a great example of that. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got guys who would really wanted to do it. Lauren Shachley is another guy who is obsessed with arm wrestling right now. And while we're on that theme, Rob Frampton, again, former high-level strongman, the original crossover transition athlete. He was the guy that was the first guy to say, right, I'm in. I'm going to come from strongman the other way. We'd seen guys go the other way, so Vitautas Slalas, Magnus Samuelsson had gone the other way. But this guy was coming from strongman, and Rob absolutely threw himself in there. We got these guys all together, along with Eddie Hall, and we just absolutely worked the living daylights out of their technical approach to the sport, how they stand, how they move. The results were fascinating, are fascinating. I can tell you right now, on the ladies' side of things, I genuinely believe there's a number of those girls that if they should choose to pursue the sport seriously at any point, they change the game.
That's really cool, man.
I genuinely believe that. The character diversity within that group of 4 girls was unbelievable. Very, very different approach, very different physical makeup, very different attitudinally, different levels of confidence. And it's that I think people enjoy.
Sure.
Because when you're showing them that whole journey, and I hope your fans feel the same, when they see what you've gone through this weekend and they familiarise with that, I think it's a really interesting approach where they're going to see the steps that you take to get to the summit. It's funny, Saray, your training partner, said to me yesterday, you talked about being perfect. Perfect's not possible, Neil, you know that. And I thought about it for a minute, and he's right, yeah, maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. But it's a bloody good thing to chase.
Yeah, of course it is. Yep.
You know, I've got there's a poem that my dad, I told you about it the other day, that I sort of live by. It's been my guiding star. A poem called If by Rudyard Kipling. It was on the wall of my bedroom when I was a kid growing up. It's on the wall of my son's bedroom now. Both those Both of them have it on their bedroom wall, and I tell them every day it's all in there. Like my dad told me, everything, every line. I have never been, and probably never will be, good enough to do what that poem sets out, line after line. But the amount of times, the pursuit of what it tells me has answered a question, has carried me through a dilemma. I can't even tell you, mate.
Yeah.
Can't even tell you.
Yeah.
It's been a weapon. It's been a weapon. And so what we do with this, we might never get there, buddy. We don't know,
Yeah, we don't know.
God knows. But we're not mucking about.
No. Yeah. No, it's neat, man. I mean, what you're doing with all of that stuff, and it's I think what you're giving back to the sport in general is really cool, right?
Thank you, mate.
Like it's a lot of hard work, and it's neat, and I think that with some of that, it's going to open people's eyes quite a bit, right? Like with what has been there. And then paths, obviously to get into arm wrestling for people, and to create a following, more of a following even than now. And I think that it's fascinating, and I've noticed that from a lot of people too. And it's nothing to say I don't love strongman, because I always will love strongman. Of
course.
Right? Like I love it, and people have seen what I have done with the sport and how I try to give back and all that, which is wonderful. And that's my contribution to a sport that gave so much to me. But, within arm wrestling, I think that people that haven't got to experience it before don't maybe know exactly what's going on or what it's all about. It's something that draws you in for sure. But also, as you understand it, it becomes more fascinating.
Sure.
Right. So it's like, well, what is actually happening? It's very much like, I think with like the UFC, for example, when Joe Rogan comes in and he's the commentator and he's explaining what the fighters are trying to do.
Yes.
Right. Because it's one thing to watch a fight. It's a different thing to at least partially understand what they are trying to do. And I think as a, if there's fight fans, that makes it fun, right? So like as you're commentating arm wrestling, it's like, hey man, that setup was really good, or you see where he went with this, or maybe she was trying to do this in that match, or whatever it is. But as you get invested in it a little bit more, it's like, okay. And then like you said, the characters within the sport, and I would argue that within the sport of strongman, that exact same thing happened, right? You had to have the characters built up, and they became known. And so, it's
guys like yourself, Eddie Hall, Robert Oberst,
sure,
Lawrence Charlet, guys that have got more notoriety, obviously Hafthor Bjornsson,
yeah, of course,
and those intense rivalries, unique friendships, yourself and Ed.
Sure.
If you think about that, look at that situation with yourself and Eddie. The constant banter, the back and forth.
Yeah,
you're very different characters, yet very similar characters.
Yeah,
it's what people buy into the most. They love to see that. They enjoy that, and it's fascinating because it's real and it's real life.
Yep.
The demystification of arm wrestling is one of my primary objectives. I would like to. Everybody watching, I'd like you to enjoy the sport of arm wrestling. I'd like to be able to help you to see some of the nuance of the sport. Having guys like yourself involved, Eddie involved, and these other people we've spoken about, the girls that have come in now, I am hoping, and the intention is, that we can demystify the sport and take you on a journey, allow you to see the journey of these individuals as they step into a new environment. And sometimes by doing so, will help us to demystify it, because they'll see it from an outsider's perspective and articulate it from an outsider's perspective. I came in, this is what I experienced. And going on that journey with them can be really good fun,
Sure.
And you'll get the highs, you'll get the lows. Yourself, Eddie, guys like Rob Frampton, Katie Smith, Laura Baxter, Rebecca Roberts, Donna Moore. These are amazing characters. You will see the highs, the lows, the impact on them mentally, physically,
sure,
the blood, sweat, and the tears, and it's all part of that enjoyment. And I really hope people get the chance to invest in this journey and watch you, mate. Watch where you go.
Well, it's going to be fun, man. I think we need to get some food in.
You know, I'm all about that, mate.
Yeah. So we're gonna get that. We'll probably get back to work. I'll probably talk Neil into letting me do a little bit more today. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Make sure to give Neil some love, and definitely check out all the good stuff that he's got going on.
Thank you, mate.
And hopefully you enjoyed that. And if you share the show, it definitely helps us grow the podcast and get it out to more people. So that's very much appreciated. Let us know what you think in the comments as well. Definitely, fun to see where everything's going. We talked about a lot today, so it'll be interesting to see what people's comments are. What do you think? What do you think? Hearing some of the stuff that I said, and maybe more importantly, what Neil said. So, going to be a fascinating journey to go down, my friend.
I'm excited, mate. I can't wait, and I hope you guys at home will enjoy the journey. And for all the guys in American arm wrestling fans, wondering who the next big thing was, you got one.
Well, we will end on that. I hope you all are doing amazing for now. Go out and be great, and we'll check you guys later. If you enjoyed this podcast episode and would like to listen to another, click right here. And to stay informed about new podcast episodes, click here to subscribe.